from the historic campus of Hillsdale College in Hillsdale, Michigan, where the good, the true, and the beautiful are taught, nurtured, and honored. This is the Radio Free Hillsdale Hour, bringing the activity and education of the college to listeners across the country.
See him hold his ear. I see the blood go across his face. I'm like 4, maybe 5 feet away. And I see him take himself down. He didn't fall down.
This is your host, Scot Bertram. Welcome to the Radio Free Hillsdale Hour, part of the Hillsdale College Podcast Network. That was Salena Zito, political reporter for the Washington Examiner and author of the new book, Butler, The Untold Story of the Near Assassination of Donald Trump and the Fight for America's Heartland. We go in depth with Salena Zito today on Butler here on the program. Salena, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
We appreciate talking with you. You are previously a Pulliam Fellow here on Hillsdale's campus, which means we've actually met in person. We've talked.
And I have a deep affection for Hillsdale. That was a wonderful experience that I hope I get to do again. I stay in touch with almost all of my students, and it was a very rich experience.
We appreciate your presence on campus and your assistance to our journalism students here. The new book is Butler, and part of this is a discussion of exactly what happened on that day in Butler, the assassination attempt on then candidate Donald Trump. You were there. You were a part of it. I don't want to spend a good portion of the interview having you relive what happened, because that is so powerful inside Butler. But if you could, take us through some of your most vivid memories of what you experienced that day.
Some of my vivid memories are actually comical. I'm not the type of person that gets nervous during interviews. I tend to be more interested in having a conversation with whoever I'm interviewing, whether it is a candidate for president or just someone on the street that I meet and wondering, how politics is impacting their lives. So that part aside, I was going into the event, and so what was on my mind was that I get across to voters, sort of what President Trump wanted to accomplish. And so I wasn't nervous about that I've interviewed him numerous times. However, what I was nervous about was logistics. Logistics always make me crazy. So some of my most vivid memories about that day was like getting there on time. And, I was going with my daughter, who is a photojournalist, and my son-in-law, who we had convinced that he needed to carry all of our equipment so we would look nice and not hot and sweaty. But it didn't matter. We looked that way anyways, like 101 degrees that day. And I pull up to their house, and he's washing the car, and he's clearly not showered yet. So my anxiety started immediately. But, we got there, we got out on enough time. I had blazingly lied to them that we needed to be there by 1 when we didn't need to be there until 2. So those things still stand out to me that day, and driving, when you go to a Trump rally, it is a very colorful experience, much like going to a Jimmy Buffett concert used to be, where people were dressed with parrot hats and parrot shirts and everybody's happy. Well, Trump rally is very much like that, only it's with patriotic clothing, right? And so as we're driving, and people are there's a lot of entrepreneurness associated with the Trump rally. So as we're driving along, we're about a mile outside of the rally event in Butler, and it's a residential street, it's like 2-lane road. And there are people selling kids selling lemonade and clothing and selling parking spots so you could walk to it. And there was even a guy with a fiddle that was selling a moonshine. And I so wish I would have stopped there, or at least got his name, because I was like, I love this so much. So those are sort of the colorful moments that stand out to me for that day.
Salena Zito is with us. Her new book is Butler. You can also read more of her work at salenazito.com. Something else from Butler, Salena, you mentioned everyone at this rally in Butler is so happy What do they have to be so joyful about?
They were really excited. The last time that President Trump had come to Butler was just on Halloween night in 2020. And a lot of journalists struggle to understand why he goes to places like Butler, Pennsylvania, or Ashtabula, Ohio, or Luzerne County, Pennsylvania, because these are places where these voters are very, very different than what you see in DC and New York. It's not that someone's better or worse, but these voters don't have the same power in their voice. And they don't get, they're often covered in a disparaging way. So it makes them more joyful. It makes the event even more exciting for the people that he shows up in their backyard. There are very few politicians that understand that. There have only been ever in our history 2 candidates for president that have ever campaigned in Butler. And that's Donald Trump and John F. Kennedy. About 10 minutes before President Trump has landed, it's about 5:15, but he's in the back behind the stage and he does this thing called a click area. And basically what he does is he meets with state troopers, first responders, thanks them for their service. He meets with community people, and his staff will pull random people from the rally, and he'll just talk with them and shake their hands. It's one of the things that people don't get about President Trump. He's incredibly curious. He really wants to know about people's lives.
Salena, you have an interview before the speech with Donald Trump that is moved and adjusted. Eventually it's going to happen after the speech, but he still wants to talk to you beforehand to say hello. What's happening in those minutes before Donald Trump takes the stage in Butler?
We get guided out and he goes on stage. He goes out on stage and we're in what's the area, my daughter, my son-in-law, and myself, and 3 other photojournalists, Evan, Anna, and Doug Mills. We're in the buffer area. The buffer area is between the stage and the rally goers. And mostly it's used by Secret Service and photojournalists so they can get photos. Usually, there's never a reporter there, but at this point I'm stuck because I have to leave immediately afterwards to go in the motorcade, the 3 of us do. So they just put us in the buffer. And that's how I ended up 4 feet away.
Right.
And so we follow, the president goes out, Lee Greenwald plays. If y'all look at the cover of the book, my daughter took the photo. It's a very powerful cover in that you see President Trump, but you only see the back of him. And he has his arms out and the crowd is looking at him. And that's significant because in the next couple of minutes, President Trump does something he never does. 2 things, and they save his life.
Salena Zito with us, her brand new book, Butler, The Untold Story of the Near Assassination of Donald Trump and the Fight for America's Heartland. She was there as this happened, as it unfolded. Salena, what are those 2 things that then candidate President Trump does that help to save his life?
The rally starts, he starts speaking, and he does something 2 things he's never done. And again, they saved his life. There is a chart that comes down, and I remember thinking, what is he, like Ross Perot? What is going on here?
Right.
And he does another thing that he never does. And if you've ever been to a Trump rally, you know the relationship between him and the people attending is very transactional. He feeds off of them. They feed off of him. It's a very emotional connective tissue. He'll turn his body away to look at different parts of, a stage, but he never turns his neck away. But the chart goes down, he turns his neck away, and that's when I hear 4 pops.
That's Salena Zito. Her new book is Butler. It's out now. We'll continue our conversation in a moment. She'll tell you what happened after she heard those gunshots. First, let me take a brief moment to encourage you to stay in touch with us at the Radio Free Hillsdale Hour. Go to radiohour.hillsdale.edu. Click the subscribe button. That will take you to our email list sign up. If you give us your email address, we'll send you 1 email each week with the guests, and the topics in every week's program. You'll never miss a single edition of the Radio Free Hillsdale Hour, and we invite your feedback through that system as well. Go to radiohour.hillsdale.edu, click subscribe, enter your email address, and you'll get a note every time there's a new episode of the Radio Free Hillsdale Hour. Thank you in advance. We appreciate you listening. We continue now with Salena Zito. Her new book is Butler. When we left off, she was telling us she just heard those gunshots, those pops. Salena, what happened next in front of you in Butler?
I see him hold his ear. I see the blood go across his face. I'm like 4, maybe 5 feet away. And I see him take himself down. He didn't fall down. And within minutes, within the next 4 shots are fired, I'm still standing. Mm-hmm. Never once occurs to me to get down. Never once. I'm like, I have a job to do. I have to continue doing it. This is my job. And the next 4 shots go off. And then Michelle Picard, my son-in-law has already taken my daughter down. And Michelle Picard just like throws me to the ground. I had black and blue marks for at least 10 days and just covers me on top of me. And there's an iconic photo. It's in the book as well, but there was an iconic photo of him on top of me, and you can see my cowboy boots.
Yes.
And so many people knew it was me because I always wear cowboy boots.
I remember seeing them when you were giving your lecture here at Hillsdale. Yes.
Yeah. I always wear them. They're comfortable, yet dressy. They're very stylish. I just wear them. And thank Jesus in heaven that I was wearing a skirt that day. That is a skirt with shorts underneath it. Mm-hmm. Every woman listening to this show is like, yeah, we get it. Because my legs are way up in the air when the photo was taken and he took me down. Everyone in my family thought I was dead at that moment.
You can read about the rest of that day in Butler by Salena Zito. I want to ask quickly about the next day and then ask about the fight for America's Heartland. So the next morning, you get a call from President Trump, and he calls you 7 more times that day. He has staff, he has advisors, he has people around him. Why do you think he was so diligent about reaching out to you multiple times that next day?
Well, the first time he called, he said, Salena, this is President Trump. Like, I don't know it's President Trump, right? And he said, before I didn't even say hello. And he said, are you okay? Is Shannon and Michael okay? And then I did something that my parents are not going to be proud of. And even though I'm 65 years old, I still worry about my parents being proud of me. I swore at the president. I'm not going to swear now, I promise. But I said, are you bleeping kidding me, sir? You've just been shot. And then I was like immediately mortified. And he just laughed at me. I want people to read the book to find out these parts. But These conversations were very deep, were very, very emotional. And they centered on the importance of being strong when you're a president, that you transcend from being self to a representative of being the president of the United States, just which you will find out is behind why he said fight, fight, fight.
Yes.
People think that was a grandiose, sort of Trumpian moment. No, it was a very presidential moment. Mm. And you also find out about faith with him. And not just in that moment, but also throughout the dozens of interviews I did with him across Pennsylvania in talking about faith and talking about God and his struggle, profound struggle with the death of Corey Compatore. Mm-hmm.
That's all in Butler from Salena Zito. It's also this great book and look at the fight for America's heartland and these people and places that only Salena Zito gets to. You have a piece of advice early in the book about the importance of place. Yeah. And you say if other journalists would just understand the importance of place, they'd know what, whom, and how to cover today's politics. So expound on that. Give some young journalists some advice about the importance of place.
Well, and that's one of the things I really drove home with my students at Hillsdale. that we have to have more understanding of the people that decide elections. They are not the people that live in Washington and New York. However, that's where the majority of our cultural curators are, right? The people that run corporations, institutions, legacy media, Hollywood, the NFL, right? They're all sort of centrally located in these super zip codes. And the people that live in these super zip codes are very transient. They came to here. They aren't from here. People that decide elections are very rooted in place. Place is their power, whereas money and transaction and wealth and, being on a board of something is power for someone in DC or New York. Mm-hmm. Power for someone in the middle of the country is being able to live down the street from your grandparents. Power is being an usher in your church. Power is being part of the Rotary Club or the JCs, making a difference or coaching Little League. Mm-hmm. And being able to see that stretch of generational experiences where you are connected to your parents, your grandparents, and your children and your grandchildren. That is power, and that power comes through place, through rootedness. The majority of Americans, this is going to blow your mind. The majority of Americans, 8 out of 10, this is not something I just made up. This is census data, live within just a handful of miles of where they grew up. Mm-hmm. So because of that, they don't consume politics in the same way that someone from DC and New York does. Their consumption and understanding of politics is very wedded to how does this affect my community? How does this affect my family? How does this make my kids' school, where my parents went to school and where I went to school, how does it make it better and stronger? And that is really laid out in the book. I kept almost wanting to scream at the top of my lungs in frustration because, there was an assumption that Trump would only earn white working class. Mm-hmm. And I kept saying, no. The working class and the middle class don't vote by race. They don't get divided in the way that you are dividing them. They vote shoulder to shoulder because they live in the same neighborhoods. They work at the same places. Their kids go to the same schools. They're standing on the same soccer fields. They vote with each other. There's connective tissue between each other mm-hmm. and no connective tissue with New York or DC.
Yeah. Salena Zito with us. Butler is her new book, The Untold Story of the Near Assassination of Donald Trump and the Fight for America's Heartland. The book takes us through that last year or so of the presidential campaign. One of the things post-assassination attempt, you note that people were now more proud, more willing to publicly support Donald Trump than perhaps they would have been before the assassination attempt. Do you think there was a measurable impact on his support, or was it simply people changed the way they talked and perhaps discussed him with others?
It's the latter. The support was there. I would argue that the support had been there since he showed up in East Palestine, right. East Palestine,
yep.
Which is where the train derailment was. I would argue that cemented him. What made the difference in terms of the robust conversation about supporting him is people were like, I went to a soccer field and there are these young moms, college-educated moms, who the assumption was that they were going to vote for Harris mm-hmm. because that's the silo that my profession puts them in. And they had like Trump hats on and Trump shirts on, like fight shirts on. And I was like, oh. And so I talked to them and I did this repeatedly. And I did it repeatedly with people that they assumed wouldn't vote for him, meaning Hispanics and Blacks. And they were basically like, yeah, he took a bullet for us. We can wear a hat. It really came down to that.
Yeah.
And the other frustrating thing that really drove me crazy, not just the dismissal that President Trump would earn the support of his minorities. But I kept reporting, and it was ignored, that the amount of young people, the amount of young people was just mind-blowing. And I went back and I remember writing in 2017 for the New York Post. I remember writing that Gen Z was more conservative. And I took a lot of guff for that. But it turned out, these kids were just coming of age and just voting, starting to vote in 2016. It turned out that was exactly right. And I saw them in droves. They came in every shape, size, color. They came from every background, and they were all in. And by the way, they still are.
Yeah. During the campaign, you are watching Kamala Harris mostly from afar as she takes the Democratic nomination from Joe Biden. And you describe this very strange non-rally in Pittsburgh ahead of the Democratic National Convention. There's no press involved. No one knows when and where it's happening. There's no voters who are there. And it struck me as I read, Salena, that this was the basement campaign. This was the Biden basement campaign above ground, meaning you saw Kamala Harris, but there was no interaction. Why do you think that was the strategy, and how did that harm her? Did that harm her with regular voters across the country?
Oh, I remember calling a strategist in D.C. and saying, what Democratic strategist, like, what's going on? Every event is closed. People can't, you can't attend and, kick the tires, right? Mm-hmm. You have to be invited, and you have to be part of the Democratic committee locally. She spent, I think, a total of 14 days in Pittsburgh, and nobody saw her. It was the most. And then when she did come out, she went to this historic neighborhood in Pittsburgh, very popular. There's 122 small businesses in this area. It's called the Strip, right? Mm-hmm. All of these great ethnic Epicurean shops. She goes to the one place that is a franchise called Penzeys Spices, who is run by this not so nice person. I'm going to use a good adjective, a not so nice person. Y'all can look it up, who regularly posts on his company's news website how much he hates Republicans. And I'm like, why would you pick this place? Like, you're signaling that you don't want any other voter except the Democrat. Mm-hmm. And you can't win an election by doing that. You can't win an election by having events that are only for the Democratic committee people. Mm-hmm. You have to form a coalition. There was no effort to form a coalition. There was no reaching out to different segments of the population that might be curious and might consider voting for her. And it was the worst run campaign that I've ever seen. It was the Biden campaign of 2020. They were sort of trying to get away with that basement campaign thing again. Right. But when you're with a viable young woman running for president, it was terrible. Mm-hmm. It was absolutely terrible.
You have a lot about J.D. Vance in Butler as well, Salena, and you had interactions with him pre-Senate campaign, certainly on the campaign as vice presidential candidate. The press said he was a liability, and it turns out he was a weapon. Why was he so effective for Donald Trump?
Oh, I remember J.D. Vance and I were both new hires at CNN in 2017. We're covering we're on a panel, and there's 15 people on the panel. Probably not really, maybe 8. And it's in a half circle panel. Heather and I are on the furthest ends, and it's inauguration day, and they are bashing Trump voters. And I remember looking up at him and him looking up at me, and we both rolled our eyes because we knew the camera wasn't on us. And afterwards I instantly understood this young man. I instantly understood his potential. We did a couple of speeches together. I was the moderator. He gave the speech. And I just knew that this young man had so much potential and I told him the first time I met him, you're going to be governor one day. And he teased me about it when he ran for senator. He goes, "You were wrong, Zito." I'm like, "Not that much. I wasn't that wrong." And I followed his race. Everyone said he was going to lose that Senate primary. And I'm watching him. I'm covering it. Ohio's just across, literally 24 miles from where I live. Covered it extensively. And I was like, no, he's not going to lose. He's going to win. I knew he was going to win that governor's race, that race against Tim Ryan in Ohio.
Yes.
But I remember sitting with him. We were at a trade school in Cincinnati in, I think it was like April of 2023. And we were just chit-chatting after the interview, just catching up. And it dawned on me in that moment, because he had become very close with President Trump. He had never been close with him before, but they had developed a relationship. And as we're talking, I'm like, oh my God, if he asks you to be vice president, would you do it? And he completely changed the subject. And we start talking about Skyline Chili. And I'm like, oh, I see where this is. He's not a liability. He is so smart. He is so charismatic and personable, but he's also of a brand new generation for conservatives and for the conservative movement. Both he and Marco Rubio really take the lead on the movement.
One final question for Salena Zito. Her new book is Butler. I know that we can look at this and see exit polls and this and that, but Salena, you saw 2016 before anyone else, and you covered everything leading up to 2024. So I want to ask you, how would you compare and contrast the 2016 Trump coalition and the 2024 Trump coalition?
So it's essentially the same, but expanded. So in 2016, among the working class, it was majority white. That has dramatically changed. Same kind of voter, right? The same, lives in the same kind of place, except that it's expanded beyond the white working class voter. I don't really see much of a change outside of just an expansion, an important expansion, but an expansion of what already existed in those 7 archetypes that I laid out in my first book, The Great Revolt.
Salena Zito is wonderful. Her new book is as well, Butler, The Untold Story of the Near Assassination of Donald Trump and the Fight for America's Heartland. You can also catch her in the Washington Examiner, print and online, as their national political reporter. Salena, thank you so much for joining us here on the Radio Free Hillsdale Hour.
Thanks for having me.
Up next, Christopher Matsos, Chairman and Associate Professor of Theater here at Hillsdale College, tells us about the role of theater in a liberal arts education and what we can learn from studying it. I'm Scot Bertram. This is the Radio Free Hillsdale Hour.
Hillsdale College is a small, Christian, classical liberal arts college that operates independently of government funding, and we want you or your son or daughter to apply. At Hillsdale, students grow in heart and mind by studying timeless truths in a supportive community dedicated to the highest things. Hillsdale College costs significantly less than other nationally ranked private liberal arts colleges and receives regular recognition as a best value, and nearly all students receive financial aid. Our robust core curriculum, vibrant student life, and 8-to-1 student-to-faculty ratio make for an education like no other. For more information or to fill out an application, visit hillsdale.edu/info. That's hillsdale.edu/info.
Welcome back to the Radio Free Hillsdale Hour. I'm Scot Bertram. Be sure to subscribe to get new episodes of this program. Do it via Apple Podcasts, via Spotify, or via YouTube. We're joined by Christopher Matsos. He is chairman and associate professor of theater here at Hillsdale College. Dr. Matsos, thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me today.
Talking today about the role of theater here at Hillsdale and in a liberal arts education. And that's where I want to begin the conversation today, which is what role should and can drama and theater and a program about those topics play in a liberal arts education?
Last night, I was at a rehearsal for our first ever playwriting competition, one of the performances that's going to be a part of this. And a freshman student was speaking to me about his interest in possibly becoming a theater major. And I said, "What do you like about theater?" And he said the perfect answer to this question, which is that theater is itself, it captures everything that we love about the different liberal arts. It's a perfect microcosm of all of the different things that we look to in this quest to understand the human experience. It is history and it's literature, it's poetry, it's music, it's visual art, it's everything, religion, politics, economics. And it's not to say that theater sort of owns those things, but it is a perfect vehicle and one that our ancestors have known for millennia, that it's such an excellent way to explore the world. And so I think it's as I said, just a microcosm of the liberal arts. And we try to situate it that way on this campus, that our department is kind of a mouthpiece for expressing the things that are most vital to us on this campus.
So how would you describe the overall philosophy toward theater here at Hillsdale College? What might be different here than perhaps in other campuses?
I think, and I'm biased, but I think we do it better than anyone else. A lot of theater programs around the country are predicated on a kind of promise toward some sort of future success. You know, we will train you to be an actor. We'll prepare you to go to Hollywood or New York. And many of those, there's some grounds to such promises. But I think we look to a broader and perhaps more eternal view in what we do, in that we prepare students for a life that incorporates meaningful art in wherever their journey will take them. We help students to find their voices as artists, whether that's actors, directors, playwrights, designers, so that wherever they go, the work will be good. We're not trying to train them and gear them up toward the promise of some sort of commercial success. And I think that comes from a philosophy that the best practitioners of theater over the ages have valued. You know, the Greeks, for the ancient Greeks, theater had a purpose of teaching, and one of community engagement, and one of healing. A lot of ancient Greek theaters were established near hospitals, and the thought was that the power of going on a journey with a character had a catharsis and a certain emotional and even at times physical or spiritual healing. So I think that's kind of our heritage, and our trajectory is one of celebrating and forwarding our own, vision for what our community is, and healing those around us, and teaching. And I think that sort of speaks to what our college is about too.
How do you balance theory and history and then also practical experience inside the curriculum?
That is such a good question, and it's another of the things that greatly distinguishes us from other schools. So we have a little theater company on campus that is called Tower Players. It's been around since immediately after World War II, and it's brilliant. And we do usually 3 or 4 large productions per year. But that's only part of what we do. We have a robust curriculum that involves a few different levels of acting classes, where we study everything from Shakespeare and the Greeks to modern movement and voice techniques. We also have design courses where students learn about sound design and lighting design and costume or scenic design. But a thing that we do, I think, better than most other programs is we have not one or two, but 4 theater history classes. We dive very deeply into the history and the literature and theater criticism. We start with Aristotle and his great poetics, and we work our way forward through primarily the Western tradition, but also we touch upon world theater. And so we have 4 and arguably 5 or 6 courses that are in that vein that no one else is doing. In fact, we see a serious push toward limiting and even eliminating the number of plays that are taught, particularly in the Western tradition. And when you don't teach those plays, they vanish. And so we're very proud of the coverage of ideas that we afford our students.
It is said, in fact, on the website for the theater department, that the Hillsdale theater major is more academically rigorous than at other undergraduate institutions. Is that focus on history, literature, criticism, the reason for that?
I think that's a big reason for it, yeah. But also just that we, like I said, I've taught in some large state schools, and there's been some wonderful things about those experiences and some other smaller places, but there's no place like Hillsdale in terms of, in my mind, in terms of the quality of the students. It's just great students meets outstanding curriculum. And I'm really proud of our department being no different in that way. When we teach acting, we don't teach a sort of superficial technique that is geared toward giving you some sort of commercial, success. We look at kind of how do we as artists establish our own process? What is our voice? What is our integrity? What are the stories we're trying to tell to our community and the world? And so, yeah, I think that we're more rigorous, but also have a better view toward the purpose of theater.
Talking with Christopher Matsos, he is chairman and associate professor of theater here at Hillsdale College. You mentioned the Tower Players earlier in the conversation. What kinds of performances are offered through the year? What opportunities are open for theater students?
I'm very proud of Tower Players and the work that we do. And the opportunities are for theater students, but they're also for the entire campus. And that's a really neat thing about our college is being so small. We tend to do 2 plays each fall and a couple of offerings in the spring as well. We tend to do 1 musical per year. And we like to celebrate classics, but also kind of modern classics when we choose something like a musical. So we haven't done quite the same as what students would find maybe at their high school or their community theater. We try to do things that might kind of stimulate the mind and the heart as well as that impulse to do jazz hands. But we also gravitate toward classics a bit. We like to do Shakespeare at least every other year, although the last couple of years we've produced Shakespeare every year. We have done Greek tragedy, and we've also done some real modern gems. We did the musical Bright Star last year. This fall, we did Lauren Gunderson's Silent Sky, which is kind of a modern classic, I would say. And so a wide range, really, of opportunities in terms of the type of work, open to all students. Anyone can audition. We have auditions every semester, and anyone is welcome. But one of the areas that we've been growing, I think, very successfully is what we do at the end of each year. For a long time, we've had what we call a festival of short plays or a festival of student-directed work. So we kind of set the students up throughout the year on, working on excellent material. And then at the end of the year, we say, okay, show us what you can do. And we have student directors do 1-act plays. And then on alternate years, we now have this playwriting competition that we've just set in motion. And so we'll alternate between having directing student directors and student playwrights having their work featured at the end of each year.
All right. So how can learning, studying, performing these plays help teach students and the audience perhaps about history, economics, religion, philosophy, things that were thought, debated, and talked about through the years?
Yes, it is. That's such a good question. And the answer is embodiment, lived experience. When you are reading something, it's hypothetical. When you are embodying it, representing it with your whole person on a stage, even if it's just in front of a few others in a class, that shifts it into a different dimension. We know now that the brain doesn't really identify a difference between a story that it's being told and your own lived experience. And that helps us to explain why theater is so fundamental and has been going on since as long as we seem to have had people. But the Greeks knew this very well. So many of their plays are almost like models in the way we'd have a computer model that kind of projects outcomes. Greek tragedy was a sort of computer model for outcomes of human behavior. So it was a sort of safe public space for saying, what if someone makes this choice versus that choice? So when the actor is simply the interpreter, the one who interprets or reads or embodies the material given to them, and when we do that, it's a major shift in the mind. And so I think, and I recommend to my colleagues in all disciplines, that a physical, on your feet, embodied experience of material always finds its way into the mind a little more directly in a lasting way. And so I think for those reasons alone, it's worth doing.
Talking with Dr. Christopher Matsos, he's chairman and associate professor of theater here at Hillsdale College. How does theater help students prepare not just for the next show, the next performance, but for life itself? How can it assist in navigating the human experience?
I have a class that I teach every fall called Acting 1. And what seemed to have started in the minds of many students, at least when I was first starting at Hillsdale, as acting lessons, has clearly over time demonstrated in the experience of students to be one that's more like life lessons, or kind of, how do I comport myself as an individual? And we do so much work here that's awesome work about the governing oneself. And what an acting class does is helps the individual to know, how do I simply stand with my feet planted, my heels planted on the ground? How do I make eye contact with my listener and hold it? How do I breathe when I'm going into a moment that might be kind of an exacerbating moment? So the skills that prepare the actor for the stage are the same that prepare the individual for a meaningful and a life, and one that's lived intentionally. And so I think that I've seen over the years a real move from that acting 1 class being only for actors to being for people who just want to have some of those skills. Mm-hmm. And they're frequently testifying to that. I routinely get, particularly, from certain disciplines. I just got another email the other day from a former student who's a lawyer who said, I've just blown away the competition in law school from my ability to simply stand up and be strong and assertive in my presence. And that's only one example. I think that the skills are widely applicable.
For the audience, for those who appreciate theater or the arts, how can one be a better appreciator, if that's a proper word to use, of theater and of live performances?
It is so important that we do this. There is a skill to being a listener and to being an audience member that we culturally are losing. And it is because we've become so used to being entertained or educated by screens that don't notice our reactions. And this never used to be the case. In history, the audience always was a participant in the theatrical event. Shakespeare, to attend one of Shakespeare's plays was like attending a boxing match. People were, rooting for their favorite character. And so we've lost that. And I think it's really important because we we need to signal to those speaking to us that their efforts matter. And so I tell students, even when their audience is only in the sense that they're listening to a lecture I might give, that, you're going to go off and work somewhere and your boss will be speaking to you, and you must wear your respectful demeanor when you're doing that. So in answer to your question a little more directly, I think that people should seek out live theater, first of all, because simply attending a live thing cultivates that skill. And prior to going, research the play that you're going to see and its themes. There's a wonderful practice in the theater called dramaturgy, which is often overlooked, but it's the art of theater research. And so often you will find a dramaturg has written up either a website or some information that audiences can take in before going, because, you'll be a little more tuned into what you're going to experience and have a better time. But it's vitally important that people cultivate a habit of going to live events, music and theater, to be better at being places.
Yeah. You mentioned previously, the specific goal of the department is not to have people go into the arts, go into theater. Certainly some students do. What kind of professional opportunities await those who take part in the program? What's out there?
It is, and I should be sure to note that we've had over the decades many successful people who have worked successfully in the arts. I mean, we have alumni who are Broadway actors and designers and film actors and award-winning, world-class stage combat people. And so there's no shortage of those. But we've found that just as interested in those careers, many students are interested in becoming teachers, lawyers, graduate students. And I think that our degree gives a lot of skills, and not the least of which would be research methods that I think inform all kinds of areas. So we've had everything from teachers, marketing people, we've had physicians, a surprisingly wide range of people that have studied theater at Hillsdale and gone on to what might on the surface appear to be unrelated, career areas, but are in fact directly, stemming from those skills. And like I said, I don't want to disparage New York or Hollywood or anything. I myself and some of my colleagues worked in those areas and have some achievement in the professional world. But I guess what I'm really proud of is that our students don't automatically assume an orientation toward New York or LA, but instead realize that wherever they will be, we make them good at what they do so that there will be good art wherever they land.
What do you like most? What's your favorite part about teaching theater?
My favorite part about teaching theater is probably in the acting classroom, when a student realizes that acting can be taught. When they have learned or taught themselves over the years that acting is only for talented people, and when they realize that acting is simply action. And if you can do something in the presence of others watching, an act of theater is being attained. And so when they reach that point of realization, it's always the most rewarding thing. And it's really funny, because what happens inevitably every time is they forget their lines. They have practiced their lines robotically at home, and then they stand up in a class to say their lines, and suddenly the lines go out of their heads and they get a little flustered and they start to sweat a little bit, and they say, "Oh, let me start over. I messed up. I feel a little flustered." And I say, "Well, would not Hamlet feel flustered in this moment?" And they realize that they've made it, that they're acting. And that's a really beautiful moment.
Dr. Christopher Matsos, he's chairman and associate professor of theater at Hillsdale College. Dr. Matsos, thanks for joining us here on the Radio Free Hillsdale Hour.
Thank you.
That will wrap up this edition of the Radio Free Hillsdale Hour. Our thanks to Salena Zito, her new book, Butler, The Untold Story of the Near Assassination of Donald Trump and the Fight for America's Heartland, and Christopher Matsos, Chairman and Associate Professor of Theater here at Hillsdale College. Remember, you can hear new episodes every week on this station. You also can find extended versions of some of our interviews or listen anytime to the podcast. Find it at podcast.hillsdale.edu or wherever you get your audio. Until next week, I'm Scot Bertram, and this has been the Radio Free Hillsdale Hour.